Level up your LA Kings experience with Vivid Seats Elite Seats. All the on-ice Kings action with even more exclusive access and rewards. Enjoy great seats to the game in Section 103 along with Yamava Club access and parking included with your purchase. Plus, get a free Team LA Kings shop item at the game. Score your Vivid Seats Elite Seats tickets today and earn perks on each purchase from the only leading ticket company with a rewards program. Experience it live with Vivid Seats, the official partner of the LA Kings. Did you know the LA Kings have their own culinary partner? It's Superfood, celebrating 10 years and over 1 million meals served. Since 2020, the Kings have trusted Superfood to fuel their players. Now through Simply Lunch, you can bring that same performance-driven food to your office. Because when people eat better, they work better. Visit mysuperfood.com. That's mysuperfd.com. Or call 213-973-6145. Qualified companies can enjoy a free lunch for up to 10 managers.
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings. Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
Welcome back, Kings fans. It's another episode of All the Kings Men. Joining me today, Zach Dooley. How are you doing today, Zach?
Jesse, I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm good, thank you. We are less than a month out now from the 2026 NHL Entry Draft. So on the audio side of All the Kings Men, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube but who don't listen to the audio podcast, we have begun preparing for the NHL Entry Draft. So I spoke to Will Scouch about CHL prospects. Next week, we'll be talking to somebody from Finland about some Finnish prospects that might be available to the Kings in the first round and second round. Ultimately, we'll talk to Mark Yannetti. We're going to talk to Chris Peters, some people like that. We're going to start talking about the draft. So before we do that, Zach and I wanted to just kind of set the table and remind everybody where the Kings prospect pool currently is at, because one of the interesting questions that I asked Mark Yannetti, Zach, and his answer will be revealed when we finally air that episode. But one of the things I asked him, and I was wrong, and I was glad for him to correct me. I assumed that because the Kings were deep, excuse me, I assumed that because the Kings were deep on goaltending and right-hand defenseman depth, that would preclude them from looking at those types of prospects in the upcoming draft. And he corrected me and said, no, in fact, that won't preclude them from looking at those types of players. Obviously, goaltenders are rare in the first round, but I thought the presence of George Slukinski, Rimpinen, and Portillo would sort of make a goalie like a less likely shot in the third, fourth, fifth rounds, whatever.
That's fair. I get why you think that.
Yeah.
I think that with the draft, right, it's almost hard to think that like you can't look at your current NHL team and the draft as being even like interchangeable at all, right? And that's not what you were doing, but
yeah,
it's so interesting to say like, oh, well, if you look at the Kings, where were their deficiencies this year? You're not trying to necessarily fix those in the draft, because at best you're looking at a guy who might be on your team in like 2030. Right. Not at best, but more likely than not, you're looking several years out before you have an impact player from this draft class in the NHL. So it makes those jobs kind of difficult because you have to think so far ahead. And I think it's why Mark Yannetti harps so much on a best player available approach as opposed to a positional fit, is because you might be drafting for a positional fit that you don't even know exists yet. We've talked a lot about how the Kings drafted right shot defensemen who played one way and left shot defensemen who maybe had different traits. That's not really as important when the Kings don't play a 1-3-1. So if the Kings were making those picks 2 years ago, fine. But then that's now different than it was 2 years ago. So it's interesting to think of, like, I think that Petteri Rimpinen, for example, was picked in the mid rounds of last year's draft. That probably wasn't a position of need, but he was the best player available, and the Kings believed he was a pretty good value at that spot, so they picked him. And I think it'll be the same this year. It might not be, if you have a goalie and a scoring center rated the same, you're probably going to pick the center because the pipeline is much more deficient at center than it is in net. But if it's goaltender here, 2 tiers down center, the Kings are going to pick the goalie. And I think that's the way you should approach it.
Yeah, and one of the things Mark said, and again, people will have an opportunity to hear him say it later. He called back to an era where the Kings had depth at goal, and then said, before you knew it, the depth was gone. And we talked this summer about, well, what if the Kings want to make a trade to acquire a high-profile forward? It will cost something of value, and one of those things could potentially be one of the goalie prospects, and so that would diminish your depth. Brimpton doesn't have a contract, as much as we like to talk about him as being part of the pool. He is unsigned. Anyway, the point is, you never know, so you might as well. I think the phrase Mark used was a conveyor belt or shark teeth, right? Another row always replacing the former ones. So again, to set the table, we're going to start in the CHL because the Memorial Cup just wrapped up. And Jared Woolley becomes, if I have this correctly, one of 4 players to win back-to-back Memorial Cups with different franchises or something like that. I mean, he was traded from the London Knights to the Kitchener Rangers. It's hard to evaluate a player like Woolley without watching every game because he's a big, strong defensive defenseman. He's not like a point producer. So if you go and you look at Kitchener's stats, he's not near the top, right? He's not up there with Pridham and the rest of them racking up points. But you look at how dominant Kitchener was, and you listen to the rhetoric. People talk about Kitchener being one of the best, CHL franchises in a good long time. And it's hard not to think that Jared Woolley didn't have a huge part of that. And I watched him. I watched some of the Memorial Cup, and he's only out there for however many minutes a game, but he looked great when I saw him.
I think that there's such a big difference between 6'4" defensemen who can play and 6'4" defensemen who can't. Like Jared Woolley's got the monstrous 6'4", 6'5" frame. He's got the weight. He's got the physicality. He has all those things that all the big dudes have. But I feel like in the times that I've watched him and talked to people about him, like he can play too. Like he can move the puck. He's not going to jump out with offensive totals the way that maybe Henry Brestevich will, but he can play and he can keep the play moving. He can make the first pass out of his own zone. You saw it in the championship game, scored a really nice goal. And his Kitchener numbers, maybe not the best, but if you combine his London and Kitchener numbers, I think he was tied for 11th in the league in goals by defensemen. He had 12 goals from the blue line. For a guy who is going to make the league doing different things, that's not bad. Like to have 12 goals from the blue line, even in the OHL, is pretty good, especially for a guy who doesn't profile as an offensive defenseman. So I think that, and interested to hear your thoughts too, like the last 2 years, I don't know if there's been a bigger stock rise than Jared Woolley. Some of that, I think,
hard to imagine a bigger stock rise, given that he was a 6th round pick that wasn't playing every night in the CHL or the OHL. But there was a play, just your point about being able to play. I think it was in the first game of the Memorial Cup against Kelowna. It might have been in a different game, but Jack Pridham for Kitchener had the puck behind the net, sort of curled around behind the net, found a teammate who was crashing the net, gave him a great pass, but that player then had to, score the goal. And it was Jared Woolley.
Yeah.
And so if I, the reason I waited to reveal his name, I mean, obviously it was him, but if I'm setting up the play and I say, the center takes the puck, curls around behind the net and feeds it to a player crashing the net for a really nice goal, my first thought of who that player is not likely to be a 6'5", right, take you into the board defensive defenseman. Jared Woolley obviously can play multiple ways. He wins, the Kitchener won the OHL championship, which is how they qualified for the Memorial Cup. He then wins the Memorial Cup, which he had done the previous season with London. And, you and I talked about this before we started recording. I just think, I'm not sure how much it helps, but it certainly cannot hurt to have champions in your prospect pool. Former captains, people who wear letters, and people who have won at multiple levels. Like before Mike Richards ever played a game for the LA Kings, there was talk about how, he's part of the triple gold club, right? He won an Olympic. Well, I guess he hadn't won a Stanley Cup yet, but he won the Memorial Cup. He'd won an Olympic gold. He'd done all these things. So you look at Jared Woolley and you go, okay, what opportunities has he had to excel as a junior player? The list is what the list is. Did he take advantage of those opportunities? And the answer definitively is yes, absolutely he did.
He's won everything he can, right? I mean, played 3 CHL seasons, 3 OHL championships, 2 Memorial Cups. That is about as perfect as you can get, right? Have made the Memorial Cup all 3 years. And I mean, one of the most accomplished junior careers on a team side that you could possibly have. And a guy who I think we should all be pretty excited to see how he translates to the pro game. He he's certainly got a. I mean, you've been around him as much as I have. He's got a man's body. Like he's not
huge. Absolutely, yeah.
He's not a kind of guy who is like, oh man, you got to see what this guy looks like with 40 pounds added.
Right.
He has the frame, and it's just a matter of how he can kind of translate from being like the big dog in the OHL to like, okay, when you're the 20-year-old rookie, probably in the AHL, like how do you fit in playing that style? There's oftentimes like a pretty big jump, I think, going from the OHL directly to the AHL. But I don't think he could have done much more since the Kings picked him to raise his stock within the pool.
I mean, maybe won a Nobel Peace Prize or something, but like within the hockey world, within the hockey world, yeah, he's done what he could do, right? Three OHL championships, 3 Memorial Cups. Like, okay, but what more precisely would you like him to do?
Could you do?
As for his size, he's listed at 6'5", 215 on Hockey DB. And talking to somebody about prospects, I was talking about this Finnish kid, Oliver Savanto, who's listed at 6'3", and the person said, he's 6'3", 205 pounds. And it's the 205 that is the crucial part there. Because, Jared Woolley could be 6'5" and 170 pounds. And you go, all right, well, like you said, maybe let him get back on some weight. But no, it's proportional. And that's impressive. Also playing in the Memorial Cup, but having it's tough because I don't want to use the word disappointing, but Wojtek Cihas, who we spoke to earlier in the year, who came from Czechia to play in the WHL specifically because Kelowna was the host city of the Memorial Cup. And so he was going to get a chance to play in the Memorial Cup. Unfortunately, the Kelowna Rockets were just wildly outmatched in the Memorial Cup. And so they didn't have much of a showing. I'm not sure how much of the blame you can lay at the feet of a winger on a team. In fact, I don't think you can blame any of it on him, but it's just a shame that like he came here, he wanted to play in this tournament. And then in the 3 games his team got to play in the tournament, they were shut out twice and lost in overtime in the 3rd game. And I don't think he had any points. And you just sort of go like, all right, well, that's too bad.
You wonder how much like the layoff had to do with it for that team, right? Because the other 3 teams on that full playoff run, they were in form. Whereas, usually the host team makes it to like the final, like usually they're so well built that but they lost in the 2nd round. So they hadn't played in like a month in between their last game, the first game of that tournament. That's hard to stay like fully in that mode, when you have a month between competitive games and the other teams are all fully playing. I have to imagine that Kelowna was probably the 4th most talented team at the tournament for probably that reason. Like they didn't qualify on merit. They qualified as the host. Now they clearly they were a good team. They had Tisha Ginla. They added a guy like Wojtek Cihas, who, was a top end import. So they certainly were a good team. But you look at how they played against, say, Woolley and Kitchener, and it didn't look like they were quite on that level. And it's a disappointing end to what was a really impressive season for Cihas, who did a lot of things really well, very accomplished. The World Juniors, he was excellent. Tough to see it go down that way. You would have hoped that they could have put on a little bit better of a showing.
But I mean, you look at Kitchener in the OHL playoffs, won the 1st round in a sweep, won the 2nd round 4-1, 3rd round 4-1, won the finals in a sweep. Like they were just a
wagon.
Yeah, just like really good. And you could, and like I said, I watched the Memorial Cup, and you could just see it in every game they played. They were just outclassing their opponents. And it wasn't even close, which is why you sort of go like, all right, well, good for Jared Woolley, I guess. Also in the CHL, Will Sharp's team did not make the playoffs. Vancouver Giants. We don't need to focus on this very long, but I do find it sort of amusing. Like, tough year for Vancouver hockey. Just any team that played in Vancouver, AHL, NHL, PHWL, WHL. Like, I think every Vancouver team finished last in their division or conference. It's just a tough year for Vancouver hockey.
And then the icing on top of the cake is then the Canucks lose the lottery.
Yes, don't even win the lottery. Yeah, just
all down to 3rd.
Yeah, just rough year for Vancouver hockey. Jimmy Lombardi, the Flint Firebirds, they did make the playoffs, but were swept in the 2nd round by Windsor. So Jimmy Lombardi signed an entry-level contract middle of the season. We spoke to him, and he's going to be a really interesting one for me because he's a mid-round pick who signed an entry-level contract, forwent, is that a word? Had committed to college.
Yep.
Passed on that opportunity by signing the entry-level contract, but wasn't a first-round pick and isn't old enough for the AHL this season. So now you have this, like, he will return to Flint, presumably. And,
you'd have to think so, right?
I mean,
I don't think there's any other options.
I mean, I guess he could make the Kings as a long shot, but I just wouldn't think so.
Yeah.
So he's an interesting one because, like I said, Flint makes the playoffs. He scored 72 points in 65 games. Yeah, I'm not sure what to think of or expect of Jimmy Lombardi, but one of the interesting things about the draft is because of the way the positions are distributed in hockey, like goaltenders play 60 minutes of the game. So you need fewer goaltenders than you need everything else. You only have one or two per team, or I guess you have two, but like you only have one per game, ideally. So you need fewer of them in your pipeline. Defensemen, you have 6 of them on a roster, give us 6 or 7 on any given night. They play, your best defenseman plays 20 to 25 minutes a night. And then forwards, you have 12 to 14. So you just need more forwards, and there are more roles. Like you look at goalies, and it's like, well, there's different styles of goaltending play, but there aren't really different roles. Like you don't have, enforcer goalies or, defensive goalies versus offensive goalies. You just have a goalie, like stop the puck, like, hey, goaltender, tend the goal. Defensemen, you have sort of like offensive or defensive, puck moving or, stay at home. But then in forwards, you have first line, second line, third line, fourth line, enforcer, goal scorer, playmaker, power forward, defensive forward, penalty killer, special, like all these different things. And I have, and so Jimmy Lombardi just becomes this really interesting story where like he has an entry level contract. So you would think on some level he might get more consideration than other prospects, but he's also a 4th round pick who can't play in the AHL. And so who knows?
And you look at him and you say, okay, Jimmy Lombardi is not going to be a power forward in the NHL.
Right. Yeah.
At his size. Right. So what is his role and how long is it going to take him to fill that? Because right or wrong, players of his size face a longer path to reach the NHL. You could do it a number of ways. Like you look at, say, Cole Caulfield. That dude scores goals as well as anyone in the NHL. That's how he gets there despite his size. The other end of the spectrum, you have, say, Blake Lizotte, who works harder than anyone in the NHL. He got to the NHL because despite his size, right? Like it's always going to be right or wrong, despite his size, will be part of the conversation. He's interesting to me because I thought the college route maybe made sense. He's a smaller player. He's a younger player. Further back on the development curve was, I think, how Mark Yannetti kind of put it when he was picked. So you'd think, okay, you might want that longer trajectory. But at the same time, he had 36 goals, I think, in the OHL this season. He was top 10 in the league in goals, led his team in goals. He had his offensive breakout. And if that player wants to sign, then and has now the college route to where formerly an OHL player kind of doesn't have a choice. They kind of have to sign with you.
Yeah.
But now they don't. Now you have a longer, now that player has more options. And if Jimmy Lombardi takes off, he can outweight you now, whereas he couldn't before, right? Because he can go play 2 years in the OHL. He can then go to college and he can outweight the term on his deal or the length that the team has your rights, which wasn't an option before. So if you have a guy who says, hey, I'm willing to sign right now, if you like that player and believe that, despite maybe saying, okay, the college path might make sense, we can still work with him and we want him in the AHL at 20 and we can have more influence on his development. You kind of have to do it and you see what happens.
I'm just going to throw out some names just to demonstrate why I find him so fascinating. Aiden Dudas, Michael Asimont, Austin Wagner, Matt Schmaltz, Steven Johnson, Hudson Fashing, Justin Auger, Johnny Brodzinski, Thomas Heika, Michael Mersch. Like I'm just reading out guys taken in the 4th through 6th rounds of the draft that never reached the NHL as a member of the Kings, right? A couple of those names, Asimont and Brodzinski did. Yeah, and Asimont did too, but not with the Kings. Or I guess Brodzinski did with the Kings a little bit.
Yeah.
But Brodzinski found his home with the Rangers. And so there's all these, like, there's tons of players, Jordan Wheel, whoever that you draft, and because you're a fan of a team, you pay attention to, and you go, oh, okay, well, maybe that guy's going to turn into something, and then they don't.
And to be fair, I think if you go down the list of any team's 4th through 6th round picks,
100%,
yeah, probably don't make the league, right?
I'm just saying the fact that he got an entry level contract suggests that there's something about him. Because they didn't have to give it to him, right? Like, there was no leverage to force that. They opted to, which means somebody saw something. Which means, if you told me, well, maybe he does have a shot at making the NHL, my instinct would be, no, he's 4th round draft pick. There's nothing, he's not huge. There's nothing, whatever. But then you go like, all right, well, he hasn't looked. Maybe, I don't know, because otherwise,
best case, the odds are stacked, right? Like,
yeah. Yeah. So it's just, I don't know, it's just interesting. And then we also should just pay lip service to Jan Hovan, whose team did not make, or maybe they didn't know, the Sudbury did not make.
I think they got swept by Kitchener, I believe. I think they made it, got swept in round 1.
That was Saginaw you're thinking of.
I think they made the playoffs.
I thought so too, but I'm looking at the bracket right now. Or I'm looking at they lost to Brantford. Sorry, they were swept by
Brantford. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Wrong. I was looking at the wrong conference, but yes. And he is, he's big, but no entry level contract, and we'll see. But just wanted to throw his name out there because he is technically in the prospect pool. We're going to move to the NCAA right now because Denver won the national championship, which is interesting from a Kings perspective because the Kings had 3 players on that team.
Probably about the most interesting team that could have won it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. From a Kings perspective, that has to be the team you're rooting for. It's interesting because last year Hampton Slukinski won it, and this year Denver beat the Western Michigan Broncos that had Hampton Slukinski on it, and they went on to win it. And then the end result is that the Kings wind up, because Hampton Slukinski's brother Grant also signed an entry-level contract this summer. The Kings now, in the last 2 NCAA seasons, have 5 NCAA champions in their prospect pool, which is, like I said, I don't know what the actual value of that is, but it can't hurt to have champions in your prospect pool. And
if you go back one more, you can add Jared Wright into that. Right. So 6 in 3 years. Right. Good.
Yeah, I think didn't he win the tournament?
I was just making a joke because you said right, but his name
yes.
is right.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
That was terrible by me.
Yeah, but I think, didn't Jared Wright score the tournament winning goal?
I think he did. Yeah, pretty sure he did. But same point as you made in the OHL, right? It's a good thing to have players who win in your system. Good thing to have players who wore letters. I think, it's no secret that I think the Kings pool is flush with guys who project probably more as role players in the NHL and are light on top end skill players. I think that quality that you're talking about goes double for those lower end guys. I think that's where you want to add the character and those kinds of things into the game, right? Like
champions and captains.
Those are the players that you want filling out your lineup. That's the reason that in the NHL, teams that are close, they acquire those types of players who are older to fill those lower end spots in their lineup, because those are the kind of, glue guys who get you over the hump. So I think the Kings have a lot of that kind of player in their system. They're not all going to play for the Kings. You can't have 7 forwards who profile as bottom 6 guys all make your team. It's just not going to happen that way. And the Kings are lacking, I think, those higher end talents in their prospect pool. But to have guys like Brendan McMorrow at Denver, who was an excellent role player for Team USA at the World Juniors, to have Christian Epperson, who had a nice first year, in college, and then to have James Reeder, who's a longer shot pick, again, he's a smaller player, but to excel playing on the first line at Denver, I think those are all really good things to have. And it doesn't make them suddenly first line prospect in the NHL, right, but it shows that they've had success at the level they're playing at. And really that's all they can do until they move up to the pro ranks.
And you sort of apply the same rule that we used with Jared Woolley to the guys on Denver, which is given the opportunities that they have to excel, then you have McMorrow and Epperson, scoring or assisting on big goals in the tournament, where you go, okay, well, we want we want Kings prospects to score. We want or to win, right? To be champions. They were, and then a subtype of that hope is okay. Well, if the team's going to win the championship, we would like those guys to play important roles, and they did. And so you just go, all right, well, what, other than scoring a hat trick in the third period, what could Christian Epperson have done more to,
right,
to succeed in that situation? And I'm not sure there was much more he could have done.
For what his opportunity was, I agree, right? Like, it's not like he is who he is. He played the role that he played, and he won doing so, contributing to his team winning in key moments. He's a freshman. To say, hey, if he didn't score 30 goals this year, he's off. Like, it's just not going to happen. Very few guys play at that level that early. I knew so little about him, and I'm sure you're probably the same going in, because he wasn't at development camp. Hadn't really seen him play. I don't watch junior hockey on a regular basis. So he's one of those guys you just don't really know a ton about as a first time drafted player. You don't see him or talk to him at development camp. You don't learn a ton about him. And then to have him go in there, I think he had 12 goals this year at Denver, solid number playing in a depth role, wins a title. Imagine that he will play a larger role next year with guys moving on, to the pro ranks. He's one that you kind of have to think about now going forward, and having won the title puts him more on your radar than I think he would have been otherwise.
This is a super unscientific way of approaching prospect evaluation, but generally speaking, my rule of thumb is if I talk to somebody about a prospect, and I mean, not just anybody, right? Like if I talk to the coach of Denver or the GM of Sudbury, they're going to glow about their player. But if I talk to somebody who's relatively unbiased, who doesn't have a horse in the race, and I can't really put my finger on it, but there's just certain ways that people talk about players.
Yeah.
Like the way that Nelson Emerson talked about Alex Iafallo.
Mm-hmm.
You could go, oh, there's something there.
Yeah.
Because I get it. Iafallo was King's property, and, Nelson Emerson was an executive for the King, or is an executive for the Kings. And so you go like, all right, well, of course he's going to glow up every player. But there was a difference in the way he talked about Iafallo than he talked about other players. And so you start to go like, okay, that was you chose to focus on that thing. And so now that signals to me that there's something worth focusing on. The way people talked about Christian Epperson, I was just like, okay, I'm going to remember that name. And then every time he would score a big goal or assist on a big goal in the tournament, I think he assisted on the game tying goal in the championship game. You just go like, okay, that tracks with everything I've heard, right? Like that confirms my suspicions based on what I had previously heard. Yeah. And then you can start to sort of like, I'm not a sports bettor, but you can start to just say like, if somebody tells you, oh, well, I expect this person to have a good game, then you just go like, okay, well, I expect that person to matter. And then he does. And you go, right. How did you know that? It's like, I didn't. I just trusted that the people who talk about him are talking about him accurately. So.
And there are people who you talk to who do watch this guy play and have watched this guy play. And it's like, we could give you the 30-second overview, but it's like, if you talk to someone who's in the know and you're right. Like there's not a way to quantify it, but there's just a way that people talk about someone when they truly believe in that person.
Yeah.
It's just different.
I think it's just singling out, like, for example, Blake Lizotte. Nobody who ever talked about Blake, like when Todd McClellan would go on and on about how great Blake Lizotte was, he didn't just say, who's really good? Blake Lizotte's really good.
Right.
Boy, is Blake Lizotte good at hockey. He would get into what it was that he was good at. Yeah. And then he would tell you that coaches of other teams would call him up and say, who is number 46 on your roster? Like that. It's like there's details that matter that you hear people talk about. And so when you look at guys like McMorrow and Epperson and Reeder even Ryan Conley's another example where you just go like, nobody ever told me, oh yeah, that guy's good. It was specific skills and abilities and moments that they went in on. And so you go like, okay, I believe it because there's detail involved. And so we might as well mention Ryan Conley also at Boston College. He had himself a good little season. And, again, odds are stacked against him, 6th round pick, undersized, but succeeds as well as you could hope for somebody like him to succeed.
He's got skill for sure. Yep. I know he was I think he was more of like the guy when he was playing at UNH. He goes to BC. It's a bigger program. more higher end talented players. And it felt like it maybe took him a little while to get going, but then he did. And by the end of the year, I had a friend who, is based in Boston, does a lot of college hockey stuff, just sent me a clip of a goal that he scored one day. He just fired the ball. Like it was a rocket. Yeah. And it's like, he is a smaller guy, but like he's probably close to top end in the pool in terms of like skill, like on puck skill, offensive production. Like he's one of those guys that this label I think is unfair, especially with the way the game's going. But you say like he's a top 6 or bust, or he's a top 9. Like he's not the kind of guy who's probably going to come in and grind out a certain role. But if he hits, he does have, I think, higher end offensive ability than a lot of guys in the pool for the Kings. And sometimes you need guys like that, right?
I mean, I think the issue with a guy like him, because he's listed at 5'10", 190. And you go, yeah, you're right. You think top 6 or bust. And he's the kind of guy where like my first pick for him as to the path to get to the league would be, okay, develop a skill and maximize at it, right? If it's shooting, then be the best little shooter you can be. If it's playmaking, be a playmaker. If it, whatever. But then you have guys like Blake Lizotte where you go, okay, he didn't get drafted. So who knows what his path, like, I don't know. Before he signed with the Kings, I don't know what the read on Blake Lizotte would have been, but my hunch is it wouldn't have been, oh, you know how this guy makes it to the NHL is penalty killing, physicality, and hustle, right? Yeah. I would have just looked at him and said, undrafted, 5'7", like no shot, or however tall Blake Lizotte is. Apologies to Blake Lizotte if I undersold him. But so Ryan Conley, you look at it and you go, yes, my first choice for him would be maximize skill. But then I have to sort of go like, however, if the opportunity, and a lot of it is opportunity, if the opportunity arises for you to shift your identity and just become, a little wrecking ball, then like, and I shouldn't, like, he's taller than I am, so I feel bad when I talk about these guys as if they're short, but
you look at, like, you brought him up earlier, like look at Mikey Asamon, right? Like he figured out what he had to do to play in the NHL, and now he hasn't left the league in 4 years. He wasn't that guy with the Kings. Like he was a scorer too coming out of college. He was a point per game guy at St. Cloud. Even look at Alex Iafallo, right? Like he was a point per game guy at Duluth. And then those guys come into the NHL. It took Iafallo like one day to figure out what he had to do to be an NHL player. Yeah. He's a max 30, 40 point guy, but he figured out what he had to do to play in the NHL. It took Mikey Asamon a lot longer, but now that he's a very effective lower in the lineup NHL player because he started to be that wrecking ball kind of guy. Like he had to change how he played to get there, and it's a different player than he was in college. So maybe it's the same thing with economy, right? It's a good point that you make. Like maybe he has to figure out a different way to get there. But it's nice to at least have that skill base where you are a topper.
It gives you options, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it gives you a lot
and
more.
It's not, we're talking about bottom of the draft and undrafted guys, but it applies across the board, right? Like we heard from Scott Lawton, who was a first round pick, who, and we heard from DJ Smith as well, who coached him in Oshawa, if I remember correctly. He had to decide what kind of player he was going to be, because he was in all situations lean on me point per game type guy. Maybe not point per game, but he was a point producer in junior
for sure.
And then, in the NHL, he's bottom 6 penalty kill locker room glue guy. And the league is full of guys with that story where, first round pick, second round pick, third round pick, all the way down to undrafted who just had to make that decision. So Ryan Conley is out there. And of course, the polar opposite of that is a guy who this guy is the most fascinating ghost of a prospect. And I only say ghost because how hard it's been for me to try and track down anybody to talk about him. Is Jack Sparks. Like I feel like we see him once a year. He's huge, and that's kind of all I know about him.
That's about the extent of my knowledge as well.
Yeah. He played I don't even remember the name of the school now off the top of my head.
I know he was at Clarkson.
Yes, which is I believe where he is right now. He's a right shot D. He's 6'8". He's 243 pounds. He's been at Clarkson for the last 2 years. He was at St. Michael's Buzzers. That was the team that he played for.
Buzzers.
Get in touch with anybody from St. Michael's Buzzers. And he doesn't have an entry level contract. He was drafted in 2022 in the 6th round. but yeah, he definitely breaks the mold of the type of player that the Kings would take from that era as a right shot defenseman. He's not small or mobile or puck moving. He is huge. I'm assuming because of his size, and shame on me for assuming this, but I'm assuming because of his size that he leans more towards the physical than the skilled.
And if not the size, then the stat line of,
right. Yes.
2 points in 37 games this year.
Yeah. With 42 penalty minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. I think he's a big bruiser, good size, skates well for his size. I don't think he's profiling exactly as an offensive defenseman. And you're right. It's very different than the right shot D who were picked largely around him, right? Like the Celines of the world and the Clarks and the Spences and the acquired, like that kind of player, very different.
And the last name on my NCAA list is Caden Harrington, who, as I recall, impressed you at Dev Camp last year.
He did. He I was drawn to him because he played early junior hockey in my area growing up, so nice. I was drawn to him in that way. But he's an interesting one because he was an overage guy who didn't get drafted the first time around. Good size and good offensive production in the USHL, but you never know like how that translates. Thought he looked pretty good at development camp, and I think you and I both know that that's not all that important in the grand scheme of things. But sometimes you just watch a guy in a little
better to look good than to look bad, though.
The only thing worse than looking good at development camp is looking bad at development camp.
Right.
Yes. What a wise person once told me. But you get like, I don't know, little things that a guy does. They catch your eye when there's 30 guys on the ice who you don't watch very often. Sometimes that's all it is one or two little plays. You're like, oh, that guy's interesting to me, where maybe he wasn't before. And I did pick up on that a little bit with Caden Harrington. I think he transferred this offseason. I think he's going to Penn State, which is a huge school. Obviously, that Gavin McKenna this past year, a well-financed program. It'd be interesting to see kind of how he adjusts going from like a smaller school in Vermont to Penn State, which is just different in terms of, expectations and stature and all that kind of stuff.
It doesn't really matter, but the fact that he was from Vermont and went to Vermont to play was kind of like a cool detail.
It was.
It doesn't change anything about him. What interests me the most about Harrington is that he's a right shot defenseman. Like you said, he's overage, but he's 6'2", 204 pounds. So he is presumably who he is physically. But in the USHL in the 2024-25 season, which is what got him drafted, 16 goals, 18 assists, 34 points, 67 penalty minutes plus 18. And what we saw at camp and what I remember being described of him is a smart player, which the older I get, the more that quality matters to me. And if you can combine smart with physicality, right? Because it's one thing to be smart, but just be like Tyler Madden, for example. No disrespect to Tyler Madden. Tyler Madden, a really good player, just couldn't handle the pro game at the physical side of things. Like just too small. And it's unfortunate. And couldn't find a game similar to Blake Lizotte. Those are forwards, but Caden Harrington, smart and big. And so you go, all right, yes, he was an overager. Yes, he's taking a sort of unconventional path, USHL to University of Vermont, now to Penn State, but hopefully has, what it takes to figure it out.
He reminds me a little of Austin Strand, a guy who it took a while to figure out, but he had the size, he had some of the ability, but it took him a while to figure out the pro game. Austin Strand's first year at the Reign, he was a healthy scratch often. And that was after scoring, I think he scored 20 goals in the WHL his last year. He just wasn't there yet, but he had the same things that you're talking about. And he played NHL games. He wasn't a regular, but he played NHL games with multiple organizations. And for an undrafted guy, he was largely successful. I think sometimes you just have those tools, and the tools can be good. Most guys drafted there aren't going to become full-time NHLers, but if you have the right tools, maybe it can come together for you, and you just see some of those tools with that player.
And there's this one name that sort of lurks in the back of my mind as a, I don't know if cautionary tale is the right phrase for it, but Jacob Middleton, you're talking about Austin Strand, and all I could think of was Jacob Middleton, who was drafted 7th round, 2014. Doesn't play more than 10 games in the NHL until 2021-22. And now, on his third NHL franchise, because he was drafted by the Kings, wound up in San Jose, and then now subsequently plays for Minnesota. Like, sometimes it does take 10 years or 8 years or whatever it is. Like,
yeah,
that sometimes it takes that long. And obviously you can't hold on to a player that long. We talked about Michael Eyssimont earlier, who, figured it out for a different franchise. But yeah, it's a bizarre industry, and sometimes the path takes you by surprise.
When you look
Before
at the
we
Kings
wrap it up,
in reverse too, right? Like a Jeff Malott who played
right, yes,
several
drafted
years
by Winnipeg, I'm
elsewhere.
assuming. Yeah.
Yeah. Or I think he was undrafted. And, Taylor Ward was undrafted, who kind of cracks the league at this time, or even a little different, but like Trevor Moore wasn't Trevor Moore in Toronto. He made the league and he played low in the lineup. He's a role, but like he wasn't a bona fide top 9 forward there. And he comes to the Kings, he finds his home, and he becomes that player. Like it, you see, you get other organizations versions of that too, who maybe the Kings are the fit for that player, just like they weren't the fit for, say, a Mikey Eyssimont, but he goes elsewhere and he figures it out.
Yeah. Now I have talked about this with a couple of people. I talked to Cam McGuire and Paige Capistran about it when I talked about the AHL with them. And I'll ask you this, because I don't know where you come down. There is not an answer to this question that matters. It's just something that interests me. Where do you draw the line on the word prospect? So you mentioned Jeff Malott and Taylor Ward. And my attitude is anybody who has an NHL standard player contract who didn't spend the majority of last season with the Kings last year is a prospect. Like, there's two categories in my mind. You're either an NHL player or you're a prospect. And if you can legally play in the NHL, you are a prospect. So I would consider Jeff Malott, Taylor Ward, all of the older players. I'm blanking on the defenseman's name, who's the captain of the Reign right now. Apologies to Joe Hicketts. Joe Hicketts, Andre Lee, Kenny Connors, Jared Wright, Cole Gutman, Grant Slukinski, like all of those guys I would consider prospects, even though, Cole Gutman is a little bit older. Glenn Gaudin was a little bit older. Logan Brown was a little bit older. Those guys are unrestricted free agents this summer, but as long as they're under contract, in my mind, they count as prospects.
That's the easier and probably right way to do it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't think of it that way, but also the way that I think of it would not classify, say, Jeff Malott as a prospect, and then he gets called up and then he sticks in the NHL the same way.
That's why I changed it. That's why I changed it, because like the Kings kept calling up guys like Malott. Yeah.
And it makes sense to think of it that way. Like I always saw it as like, once you are eligible to sign with another organization unrestricted, you are no longer a prospect in my mind. But that does mean players slip through the cracks and you lose, so like Jeff Malott and Andre Lee are in different places. Like Andre Lee is a draft pick who's still with the organization that drafted him and has yet to qualify by one of the several ways you can do so to sign elsewhere. And to me, like if Andre Lee did that and left the Kings and signed somewhere else, like I wouldn't think of him as a prospect for that new team, but I get why you do, because it does exclude certain players. And
let me amend my definition there, because I left out too many people. I guess what I meant to say was, if you are a player and the Kings control your ability to play for an NHL team, because there are tons of guys that are prospects that don't have contracts, like Harrington, Reeder, McMorrow, Sparks, Conmey, Epperson, Rimpinen. The Kings control, like those guys can't go play for Toronto tomorrow.
Yeah.
The Kings control their bargaining power. But Jack Hughes, who could go play for Toronto tomorrow, not a Kings prospect.
Mm-hmm.
Like drafted by the Kings, plays for the Reign, not a Kings prospect, because the Kings have no control.
He's an Ontario prospect who the Kings could sign,
but they have
the other teams.
Before we wrap this up, I want to talk about one final guy in one final league, and he's the only Kings prospect who plays in that league, and it's Liga, the Finnish league, and that is Petteri Rimpinen. We talked about him a little bit at the beginning of this. The reason I bring him up is just because I spoke to Krister Kasurinen this morning about Finnish draft prospects, and I asked him about Rimpinen because he plays in Finland. And you and I were both impressed with Rimpinen when we met him.
Yeah.
This is another one of those things. Yeah, this is one of those things where, listen, me just talking to somebody doesn't necessarily mean anything. But talking to somebody who lives in Helsinki, who follows Finnish hockey, who used to work in Finnish hockey, is very passionate about Finnish hockey. You know, he's a Finn. He cares. He was really high on Rimpinen and talked about how young he is and how he was, basically the number one goalie for his team in Liga, and talked about how it's pretty widely accepted in Finland that Rimpinen was the reason his team even made the playoffs in Liga. And so I just go and he talked about his nickname, Mr. Showtime, not Texas Pete.
I like Texas Pete.
Not Texas. The Texas Pete no longer a sponsor of this team. But yeah, so Petteri Rimpinen is, I think, sort of overlooked as the Kings goalie prospect because he's the one without an entry-level contract. And he has signed a deal to play in Liga next year, the 2026-27 season. Unclear if he'll ever come over to North America, and he's a little undersized, so we'll have to see it in goalie terms. We'll have to see if he ever does wind up playing in North America. But that is another name in the Kings prospect pool that I think is worth mentioning.
He's one of the bigger reasons why I won't claim to really understand goaltenders, because all he did was stop the puck, but wasn't drafted his first year.
Right.
And then he did stop the puck more between his first and second year of draft eligibility. Yet there he was in the 5th round for the Kings to pick.
Mm-hmm.
He's just, it's a reason of hey, this guy seems to have done everything right. He was Finland's starter at the World Juniors. I think he was what, the goalie of the tournament or the MVP 2 years ago. He did extremely well. And yet coming off that performance, there he was in round 5 for the Kings to pick, having been passed over by all 32 teams several times. That is what maybe confuses me with goalies. And maybe it just is okay, well, he's not 6'6" with certain, and maybe that's all it is. Maybe some teams say he is a certain height, we will not draft him. The Kings have shown over the years they are not concerned with height of goaltenders. They are willing to take a Carter George or obviously a Jonathan Quick or even a Cal Peterson. They don't require their goalies to be a certain height. Not every team is like that. He is so fascinating to me because his numbers are so good pretty much every year. And yet he just wasn't in that class of where he was a must pick for somebody. And
it's not just his numbers, but the way people talk about it.
Yeah.
His nickname was Mr. Showtime, playing for a country that culturally gets uncomfortable being braggadocious. The Finns are not flashy, showy people.
True.
Generally speaking. I mean, but there are certain countries and cultures that have tall poppy syndrome, which I think is an Australian phrase, where it's generally speaking considered, gauche to stand out and to be, and even when he was asked about the nickname Mr. Showtime, he kind of was very sort of humble about it and was well, you can't control your nicknames. If that's what my teammates want to call me, that's what they want to call me. And we talked to him, seems like a great kid. Everybody I spoke to about him seems to think he's phenomenal. Everybody you spoke to about him seems to think he's phenomenal. But yeah, to your point, there he is. Goes through 12 rounds of the draft in 2 separate years, nobody taking it.
Yeah.
And it could just be because he's 4 inches too short.
Yeah. And time will tell, right? And how many times have we seen goaltenders picked wherever in the draft become the guy, and the guy who was picked in round 1 or round 2 flop? I think you see it probably more in net than anywhere else on the ice. So time will tell, but I mean, at that point in the draft, you get a guy with that profile, it's a worthwhile flyer, whether it works out or not. At that point, it's such a dart throw that might as well bet on the guy who has proven he can stop the puck playing in one of the best leagues in the world and on the biggest stages.
And another example, when the Kings took him, they had Portillo, Slukinski, and George.
Yeah.
And, so Rimpinen sort of becomes icing on the cake. If they were to take another goalie this year, I have to imagine that goalie would have to be something fairly special. So as we said, the draft is the 27th, 28th of June. There's 26th, 27th.
26, 27, I think.
26, 27. So we're a couple weeks out. The Kings presently have 9 picks in the draft. Last year they had a bunch. There was a brief period where the Kings took like 4 guys a year. That was not the case last year. They took their full complement of players last year and then traded down to get more. And the prospect, well, this is one of the reasons why I don't worry too much about those years where they trade picks to get only 4 guys, because if you keep your 7 picks every year, in 3 years you will have added 21 new prospects. And if you draft down and collect more, like last year the Kings had, I don't remember how many, I think Phil was 9 picks last year, right?
I think they wound up taking 9 guys. They went in with fewer picks.
Right.
I believe.
So 9 last year, 9 this year. If they trade down, it could be 10 this year. And suddenly you've restocked your entire prospect pool. And that's not even getting into guys like, and I will never talk about them because I understand rationally that it's somewhat of a waste, but the 2 guys that the Kings drafted in 2000 and I don't even remember what year, 2015, 2018, who play in the KHL, Alexander Dergashev and Bulat Shafigullin, who, to be clear, will never come over and play in the National Hockey League. But they're in there. They're part of the pool. So for whatever that's worth. But yeah, hopefully that gives us sort of a background on what the prospect pool stands at right now as of June 2nd. We have interviews with Marchinetti coming up. There will be further conversations about prospects that might get drafted by the Kings. I will just tease the one coming up. I am 100% all in, sold on this Finnish kid. I've, generally speaking, try not to care about who's going to get drafted because you never know. They could wind up trading the pick or they could wind up taking somebody you've never heard of. So I try not to care about it, but I'm sold on this Finnish kid. So.
Bring him home.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely. I'll be very excited about that, which probably means he'll be a Boston. So, anyway, Zach Dooley, thanks for joining me, and we'll talk to you soon.